Hello, and thank you for tuning in to what we hope will be a rewarding and helpful experience at ChurchCom today. We're going to try to help church communicators as much as we can in their job. My name is Neil Fisher. I'm the Director of Communications for the South Carolina Synod of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. Helping me host the show is Carrie Graves. She is the Canon for Communications of the Episcopal Diocese of Upper South Carolina. Hello, Carrie. How's the week going? Oh, that's always good to hear. Well, as always, if you find any of today's content helpful, all we ask you do is hit that like button, give us a share on Facebook, and, tweet our Twitters along. Today our guest is Scott Vaughan. Scott is a native of Atlanta, Georgia. He graduated from the University of Georgia with a degree in journalism and a minor in sociology. He has also received a certificate of completion from Emory University, hopefully I say this right, Goizueta Business School of Executive Management program, and studying strategic marketing. Scott is a former newspaper publisher and a denominational marketing strategist. He opened Scott Vaughan Communications in 2003, and today works with more than 4,000 congregations and faith organizations throughout North America. Welcome, Scott.
Well, thank you, Neil. Thank you, Carrie.
All right, let's get this show started. Carrie, you want to ask the first question for us?
Well, Carrie, no one is going to argue that churches are communities of believers, and that at the bottom line of it, we in the local church, we're in the relationship business. I mean, every church has a directive toward missions and evangelism, and however that's locally defined. I know that, Presbyterians refer to evangelism as one thing and Baptists refer to evangelism as another. But ultimately, despite the wording, we get around to making Jesus known and loving and serving people missionally within our church and beyond our church. But to do that, to have these relationships with people, we absolutely, to be in the people business, we absolutely have to understand that we are foundationally in the relationship business, and relationships don't exist without communication. In fact, communication is the glue that holds us together. If you and I stopped communicating, if you and I never communicated again, then I would lose contact with Carrie and you'd lose contact with Scott. And 5-6 years from now, if it weren't for Facebook, we wouldn't even know where each other were. So communication is what holds us together. In fact, I like to say that if you kill the communication, you're going to kill the relationship. If there's somebody you don't want to be in a relationship with, just kill the communication with them, and over time, you won't have a relationship. So communication isn't just important to the church. The skills aren't just important to the church. The church can't exist without communication. And maybe, just maybe, that's why 70 to 80% of churches in North America are not growing. It's because we don't take communication seriously, and we don't really invest in that skill set that makes us good communicators. Okay. I think it's easier for me to borrow from Jeff Foxworthy and say, uh, how would a congregation, let's say, how your question would be, how would a congregation know if their efforts are being successful? I would say you might have a dysfunctional communication ministry if. You might have a dysfunctional communication ministry if you immediately think communication conversations begin with websites and social media. That's not where you begin the conversation. You might have a dysfunctional communication ministry if you think inclusion of information in the worship bulletin makes or breaks a ministry. You might have a dysfunctional communication ministry if you don't understand that ushers and greeters are part of the communication system of the church. And no matter how great your website is, if you don't have strong ushers and greeters in ministry, it's all going to fall apart. You might have dysfunctional communication ministry if you don't research your membership and you don't research your community and understand that they are two separate and unique audiences you have to communicate with. And you might have dysfunctional communication ministry if you have no prayer ministry or don't include any mention of your prayer ministry on your website. When I am involved with a church initially, those are some of the things that I look for to sort of tell me where a church is. Before I ever even meet with anybody, I can kind of look at some of those things and determine where they are in their communication mix. Sure.
So, Scott, you kind of touched based on if, you might have if. What are some areas that congregations most often need to address? Some more specific. Is there if they do this, that will happen?
I think communication. One of the things that I find that churches make a mistake is trying to copy what another church is doing. You have to understand your audience, your internal audience, and also the community where your church is serving, and make your communication decisions based on how to best communicate with the audience. I teach that communication ministry is really three linear processes that kind of go hand in hand. The first one is understanding this little principle, this little formula, that communication is about getting the best message to the best audience by the best method at the best time. That's a little promotion formula. Best message to best audience by best method at best time. Because let's say that you personally love Twitter, but you're trying to communicate with an audience that doesn't use Twitter, then you're communicating you're communicating to an audience of self, which is not going to move your desired audience to move. And I run into that a lot with churches that are still putting all their eggs into a print newsletter, trying to reach a cultural audience that may have already moved toward Facebook, social media, email, and wonder why there's a disconnect. That's the disconnect. You're not communicating how the audience wants to be reached. So that's the first part, is understanding audience, the methodology that the audience uses, and the messages that move the audience to action, because a message that doesn't move an audience to action is not a good message. And then the timing of the delivery of that message. So that's the strategy part of it. So that's kind of the first piece. The second piece is that usher, greeter, hospitality ministry. So many churches communicate, but don't really expect any of it to work. It's kind of like, I want to go through this process to communicate and check off these boxes, but we don't ever really connect the hospitality ministry or even the office receptionist. We don't connect those people to the ministry. So I communicate out to audience, that audience responds, and I have to be prepared for their response. So usher greeter ministry is the second phase of this. That's how I greet the audience once it responds. And then the third part of it, which is one that almost every church overlooks, is then how do I follow up with those people, especially guests who self-identify. So now I'm communicating out there. The Lord sends people to my church on Sunday or on Saturday night, if you have a Saturday night service, or on a Wednesday night. Really, anytime the doors are open, Tuesday afternoon, the Lord sends somebody. Am I prepared to intersect that person? How do I get database information from that person so that we can follow up with them in meaningful ways to begin the relationship process? Most churches, to give you an example of how this begins to break down, most churches think communication ministry is just about having a website or sending a newsletter. Most of our churches don't intersect the usher greeter ministry, hospitality ministry, receptionists, don't see that as part of the mix. Then beyond that, you'd be stunned how many churches that I serve that will collect connection cards on a Sunday morning, but not follow up with those folks until Wednesday or Thursday of the next week. In a culture that says, if I text you, Neil, I expect you to text me right back. If I email you today, I expect to get an email right back from you, or
at least a response.
Hours.
I'm out of town.
Immediate response.
Yeah.
Not 3 or 4 days from now. And see, churches are still following up 3 or 4 days from now. Well, by now, if I've visited your church and I've not heard from you in a day or so, I'm thinking you don't care about me.
Yeah, that is a first thought for sure.
And so, we got this. So we have to see the big picture, that if we do these things, we have to be prepared for these things. But getting back to your more pointed question, what's the cause and effect? Do I do this and this happens? Boy, there's no one size fits all for that. I mean, you have to, it really depends on every church. But I do believe that if you engage people, beyond just the website, beyond just social media, if I engage somebody face to face, if I engage somebody voice to voice, and I care about them, and I have a system of following up to introduce them to the church and get them involved in the church, then I do believe we increase the chances that those people will stick with our church family and get involved. So,
your answer is something I have said so many times. You cannot have a one size fits all. I asked that question hoping that you would answer that.
Yeah, well,
because I mean, you have a certain crowd. You have to know your congregation. You have to know your community, and they don't all fit the same square peg in a round hole or something.
ELCA Lutherans in South Carolina are going to be different than ELCA Lutherans in Minnesota. And so too many times we go to conferences or we read books. I'll tell you, I went through a real struggle after Purpose Driven Life came back, because all these churches are reading this book based on a California church's journey, and then trying to model that in South Carolina or even beyond South Carolina in the Deep South. It's not apples from me. Some of the things just won't work, and some of the things you have to massage and make work to your local culture. In fact, that's what I tell people, Neil, whenever I go speak. I always start out by saying, look, some of what I tell you, you may want to do it exactly like I say so that you can blame me if it doesn't work. And some of what I tell you, you may think it's a good idea, but you have to massage it to your situation. And some of what I tell you, you may just have to say, "Wow, Scott, that's a great idea, but that just doesn't fit us."
Yep.
And so you got to be wise enough to be able to discern all that.
Okay, so next question I have for you. An effective communications ministry takes some resources. What are some of the kinds of resources that would help most congregations communicate better?
Well, I think certainly you have to have the manpower to do it. And sadly, churches and even denominational organizations, they completely misfire on the communication management. Many churches still see this as a secretarial function. In fact, I'll tell you, most of the churches I serve have literally dumped their communication management on a church secretary who is overworked and underpaid and kept in the dark most of the time. And if we really believe that building relationships with people is important and central to the work of the church, then we are going to take this ministry very seriously, and we're going to staff it as an executive level position. In fact, I will tell you, I think your church's communication manager is the same as should be on equal platform as an associate pastor. And sitting at all the meetings, any meeting you would have an associate pastor sit at, unless it involves something that would be private information about a family, but generally the ongoing work of the church, calendaring and visioning, I think your communication manager should be a part of that, even if that communication manager is part-time volunteer. And part-time volunteers are okay. Some churches have great communication ministry with full-time people. Some have great communication ministries with part-time people. And some churches have great communication ministries with just a team of lay people. But you have to be serious about the management of it. The other part of this is the budgeting. I kind of default back to the Small Business Association, which would say that a local nonprofit should budget 3 to 5% of its general revenue to non-personnel, non-capitalized communication expenses. So a church should probably be looking at its budget and saying 3 to 5% of this budget, and we're not including copiers and computers and capitalized infrastructure, and we're not including personnel. We should be spending 3 to 5% of our budget to build relationship with people. And now a lot of churches are probably spending a lot more than they think they are, especially if they bring in what they're spending on usher and greeter ministry and follow-up. But still, it's about the benchmark. I also break it down for churches this way. I think you look at, I kind of casually say you should be budgeting $100 to $150 per household per year to build relationship with a household. The ones you already have and the ones you hope to have. And the average church.
Let me follow up. I'm sorry to interrupt. But so $150 per household, roughly. And that would be adjusted for different places. But maybe break that down. Is that like pastor going to dinner as part of that? Is that mailers for people who aren't there? What does that mean?
For me, that would be more of like, website tweaking, social media advertising, constant contact, $30 a month for a constant contact subscription to send out email, a postcard once a month maybe, and then name tags for your ushers and greeters. Any kind of thing, if you wanted to have a little hospitality room for guests on Sunday morning, and it was very strategic, you were not just doing that, but you were doing that as a way to collect database information. I would not include travel expense for a I would not include travel expense for a pastor to go have lunch with a prospective guest. It would be more of that. It'd be more of that more tactical communication, building relationships with people. That's where I would earmark a lot of that money to go. But it would not be personnel to manage it.
Understood. All right.
So that's in the average church, I think I read a statistic once that the average church spends like less than 1% of its budget to intentionally communicate and build a relationship with people. So I think the thing about communication, and I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but communication should never be, if it's ever seen as an expense, then that's a church that's telling me they don't even have a clue about what they're doing. Communication is an investment, because pastorally, if I'm a pastor, here's how I'm seeing it. I am spending this money to invest in people who may decide to join our faith community. And as they join with our faith community, I get them involved in discipleship education. As a part of that discipleship education is stewardship education. And as part of that stewardship education is information about budget giving and where the budget money goes and how lives are changed by the budget money and by the ministries that the budget funds. And so ideally, I'm investing money in this process that ultimately is going to generate budget givers. So it should always pay for itself. I mean, it may take 2 or 3 years, but you should be able to create a system that ultimately is paying for itself.
Makes a lot of sense. All right. One more question for you.
All right.
Communications is changing daily.
Yeah.
Trying to keep up with the latest trend is like trying to keep up with the best computer this week.
Right. Right.
So where do you see, like in a general sense, maybe a few specifics, communications going into the future?
This very thing you're doing is cutting edge. This very thing is one of the significant ways that communication is going. I still travel to some places throughout the year. I travel more this summer than I usually do. But I have served almost over 200 congregations in the past 18 months using video conferencing, where I just video conference into a staff meeting. I've taught 1-hour communication clinics just using video conferencing. And so this very thing is cutting edge. I have a dear friend who's a missionary in Africa, and I'm pretty sure that he uses video conferencing to communicate back to the churches that support his work there. So this is big, and I'll tell you, I think that kind of less tactically, the more we're going to be required to be more and more audience focused, and by that I mean communicating, like knowing, okay, this is a subdivision within our community that we want to reach. What are their attitudes? Are they involved in church? Are people there involved in church? Do they have a church home? Do they understand the gospel? How can we go in there and build relationships with those people? And as we get more and more audience focused, that is going to put more pressure on our management. I mean, the local church will have that person who manages the day-to-day. It's got to get the worship bulletin done by Sunday, but somebody's going to have to be thinking about the communication vision of the church. I think video, I've been saying this now for about 3 years, that I should go to a church's website and see video on the homepage. And I think that within 2 to 3 years, we will be evaluating a church's relevance to its community based on its use of video. Because this is full-blown, the TV culture, this is full-blown, you see video, I mean, heck, more and more of the feed, more and more of the posts on my Facebook, on my personal Facebook, include a video attachment.
And I've noticed that because Facebook is changed their algorithm in particular.
Oh
just
yeah.
in order to show you and push visual contact.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's right. You're spot on there. And I'll tell you, this is going to be interesting to watch too. Um, as email is more and more, people are more and more saturated. We're almost at our saturation point with email. If you really want to move people with email, you have to almost be communicating with them all the time. And so we are really saturating we are really saturated with email, and then yes, as social media, Facebook changes its algorithm, it's becoming more pay to play. If I just post on my Facebook page, very few people are seeing it. They're trying to really push me to spend advertising, and that they're rewarding my spending with more traction. So what this is going to do, and watch this, because I've actually been reading about this through several trade publications that I get. You're going to see a return to direct mail, and it won't look like the old weekly mailed printed newsletter going out to homes, but you are going to see where more and more pressure on churches to add back regular monthly, twice monthly, some kind of direct mail postcard, some kind of direct mail contact to their audiences, just because of the saturation of email and the saturation of messages through the computer and empty mailboxes. And so I expect more of that. And I have to say this too. I think wise churches are going to return to discipleship education, where we help individual members minister to other people. Because we all know that the most successful communication is when I visit my neighbor and talk to my neighbor and speak into my neighbor's pain with the gospel, or just love and service as a believer. That's the best. One-on-one is the best form of communication. And I think that's one of the big things that I see missing in so many churches, is that discipleship education that helps me as a believer have the confidence just to step into the pain of somebody else's life. So I think that we're going to see some returns there, and it will be, we used to have those long ago in missional conversations, and I think we're going to start having those in some communication conversations too. So.
Excellent. Well, I know you've done some amazing work over the years. I know you do some consulting and have taught. Where might somebody find out more about your services, what you do?
Well, the best way is to go to my website. And I would just encourage people, if you want to stay connected to what I do, go to my website. There's a box on the homepage there where you can sign up to receive my newsletter. I don't overwhelm people with a lot of email. I send out about one a month. And so I would encourage folks to go and sign up for the newsletter. And here's one of the benefits. I teach about 6 to 7 times a year. I teach 1 hour free, totally free, without charge, free, Free, about 6 to 7 1-hour webinars on a single topic. And I've got one coming up in September, one coming up in October, and one coming up in November. And the best way to find out about those and to register for those is to go to my website and sign up for my newsletter. So I would encourage folks just simply to do that. I'm not speaking anywhere around South Carolina or the South this fall. I'm speaking in late September for the the ELCA's Southwest Minnesota Synod Fall Leadership Conference, speaking there for a whole day. And then I'm speaking in October in Jackson, Mississippi at a the United Methodist Foundation, Mississippi United Methodist Foundation, is having me out to speak for a one-day communication clinic near the Capitol, Jackson. I don't have a lot of big public speaking happening. The best way to connect with me is through my newsletter, and really the best way to get information for everybody is through those 1-hour webinars.
Okay. Carrie, while we still have Scott here, any final thoughts, any questions for him?
Well, thank you, Carrie, and thank you for your friendship. One of the problems that we have in the North American church today, and you can go to almost any church website and see it, we are calling people to come and sit. And nowhere in the New Testament do I read that Jesus says, come and sit. We are called to come and serve. And so we've got to start changing the message. Yeah, right. Exactly. And and I'll tell you, Baptists are starting to say that more and more too. Baptists have always been mission minded, but you're starting to hear that a lot more.
Well, Scott, thank you for being with us today. I really appreciate it. You have you've shared some great knowledge that I'm really hoping that our congregations can benefit from.
Thank you.
Everybody, as we move forward, we will be having more shows. There'll be a short hiatus while we assess what we've done so far. Hopefully you've enjoyed it, and we look forward to your feedback and any comments you have on the shows so far. Thank you for watching Church Com Today.